Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I wanted to cover this latest Karp interview. I thought it was a really good interview. It really did strike me. Karp seems relaxed. He seems like he's in good shape. He definitely has kind of transformed since the post IPO days. And I really like the person he's interviewing with in the format. It really came across as comfortable, interesting, insightful. He still had some carpisms in the interview, but overall, I thought it was a really good interview, and I hope they do more of these. This was great, and I like the deeper philosophical undertones. I love stuff like that. I love to talk philosophy and politics and all kinds of great stuff. But one of the things that I loved, or that I didn't really love, but struck me was just how dark the future he's forecasting is. And part of that could be being in the defense industry and stuff and having classified briefings handed to him, or seeing what's going on out there in the world. But that future of like failing institutions and near kinetic war, like actual hot wars, like that's a new Cold War he's forecasting. And I kind of have a feeling I know who he's talking about, but like that's a scary future, and it's one we should all be prepared for, even if you're thinking in terms of the market, or you're thinking about just your personal preparedness for issues, and especially if we have failing institutions like he's forecasting. You might need to be, as a business, more prepared to deal with turbulent times, maybe have more money saved up, and there might be less investment capital floating around. But in any case, just a heads up, that's a really dark future that he's forecasting, but I have a feeling he might be right. But so the first clip I want to get into here really deals with edge computing. And this is something I was talking with my boss today about, is the way in which we're tooling up to deal with models that are going to be client-side first. They're models, machine learning, that is going to run on the client. Maybe some purpose-built IoT devices that are preloaded and set up to have these larger, more complex models that deliver an awesome user experience. And the other thing we're talking about is like all of our compute infrastructure going to the edge, like on Cloudflare, for example, and how that simplifies our multi-region architectures, but introduces new challenges. So I think he's absolutely right about this edge future, but let's break down the clip.
And our software products, each the major ones that are known, PG, Foundry, but obviously the ones that are less known, the ones we're using with the special forces, both on the back end and on the front end, products that we're building to deal with specifically disjointed environments that we haven't shipped yet, and building software for the edge, are specifically built with the idea that tomorrow will be it'll be a step function in terms of complexity, where the step function, it will be accelerated because of disjunctions and lack of legitimacy of major institutions, and that other software products are built as if the world will be more static, more reliable, more certain, more able to deal with simplicity.
Yeah, he's totally right. The future is the edge. It's happening right now. It's a huge jump in complexity. I mean, it really is. I think that if we look at like three categories I'm looking at right now from my job, and just so we know, what is the edge, right? So let's break down what is the edge. When we talk about the edge, we're talking about a decentralization out of, like, say, an AWS data center, right? So like AWS has multiple regions. Within each regions, there are availability zones. Each of those is a data center. And the thing is that like that centralized geographic area presents challenges in terms of performance that we can't get around. I mean, the speed of light is still a thing, right? So like the alternative to some of this is to bring the compute closer to the user, and we can do that on cell networks. We can do that actually in-house in hybrid models, like cloud hybrid models, which are a big thing right now. You can do that by bringing your solutions on device, right? So things that traditionally ran on a server will now run on your computer. And a really good example of this, guys, is StackBlitz web containers. Like StackBlitz is an IDE that is online. You access it through a web browser. But they used this technology called WebAssembly to take Node.js, which is one of the most popular server runtimes out there for isomorphic JavaScript, and they compiled it to run in your browser. So like we have now turned the browser into the edge, right? So like edge computing is a massive thing, and it's exploding and getting bigger every day. And we're absolutely looking at like Rust, for example. Rust is a new programming language we're absolutely not new, relatively new, but it's for writing more low level code. But we're actually looking at that as a way to turn, to target WebAssembly so that we can leverage browsers as well as part of our edge compute network. So this is all exploding. So that's the edge. Just think of it as IoT devices, mobile devices, edge networks like cellular networks, satellites. Like that's the edge, right? But it's way, way, way more complicated to get things to work in an environment like that. I mean, it's really an order of magnitude more complex in terms of the distributed nature of the system. And so some things are super hard to do. And so simplifying the way you write code is one of the ways we deal with that complexity. But the other is being able to use a system like Apollo to make the deployments easier and to manage that distributed environment. And I have a feeling that's really what he's referring to here. But like in terms of the order of magnitude complexity, and some of the areas are like model deployment, right? Like how do we get models out to all these places, and how do we retrain those models? Because what happens is at the edge, a lot of times we're doing retraining on device. So like when you're using a model on your phone in an app we built, we're often building that into our retraining program, right? Because it's getting data that hasn't been trained on necessarily before, and that can help us retune the model. And so we're capturing that and going through a redeployment process. And that's really complicated. It's not super easy to do. Monitoring is much harder. Centralized logging is much harder. Like all this shit becomes infinitely harder to do. And yes, Foundry and Apollo can help simplify all of those things. And that's actually an argument for a thick client. Like, yeah, I understand that later on in the video, he's saying we need to be able to deploy it. We need to scale this down. We need to be able to scale Foundry down and scale it out. But like, I actually think this is an argument against it. Like, if we really are committed to the future, we know it's way more complicated. You are going to need a thicker client, a bigger platform to deal with all of this. So anyway, all this gets harder, and throw on top of that, right, like unstable business environments because of geopolitical threats, actual wars, disrupted supply chains as a result of those wars. You can't afford to have software that is delivering like that empowers the marginal worker. Let's put it that way, right? You got to have software that's going to kick some serious ass and help you deal with this uncertainty and retrain your workforce to not be marginal, because you're now in an environment where like failure has major consequences. Like you may not be in business because you can't get the parts you need, because of global conflict or whatever. So anyway, I totally agree with him though. It is a step up, like an order of magnitude more complex to operate at the edge.
On a journey to identify startups, in between, could call it half grown up companies, whether it's in the context of people building their company. We have Founders for Builders. We've invested in a lot of companies. We're going to continue to search for partners that can distribute not just our software, but knowledge of what it means when things are just dislocating, and how would you use software to do that? Now you could say, well, that's obvious, but actually, this is a completely new world. There really are very few experts for what does it mean to do product maintenance when you no longer have access to your core data stack, and when the assets are kind of at the edge of your enterprise and not at the center. What does it mean if you can no longer ship software to a jurisdiction? What does it mean if countries are in the middle of a near kinetic war for your supply chain? How do you get a supply chain to work if certain parts of it shut down? There's the software element where we know we have the right software products. There's the knowledge element, like how does a third party who's never really dealt with that challenge have a credible interaction with individuals that understand how to do that and then are opting for the best products on the market, which in this case will be ours.
So this theme of decentralization, I really believe this is Palantir's secret. Like they know the future is decentralized. I think they've known it for a long time. And this touches on a lot of different technology. When he said there's like really no one that knows how to deal with this, he's totally right. Like there's no one that even really knows how to do ML and AI ops that well, much less deal with decentralization on a broader scale. And the technologies involved there are things like blockchain and decentralized authority. Think like, KYC done on device, but how do we know that this person is who they say they are if they're coming from an untrusted source, But this decentralized authority is going to become way more important as we near this future where there's way more chaos due to whole regions being cut off by global conflict or supply chains falling apart and you need to quickly onboard another supplier. We need ways to be more decentralized in this way. And centralized authorities are just not going to be able to keep pace with this new world that's emerging. Or they could, but it would be a worse alternative to having a decentralized way to do it. There's things like formally verifiable code that he's not really touching on in this portion, but I think is actually a thing. Think solar winds hacks, as how does the government or anyone else for that matter safely install and use software when you're at war, and you have to really think about this because cyber war is a big deal. I think part of what Apollo and Palantir can enable is better ways to formally verify code, and to know it says what it or it does what it says it's supposed to do and nothing else, right? So I think that's going to be a challenge in this world, and new sort of agile development methods to tackle even more uncertainties. So like when he talks about finding people who know how to operate this way, I think he's specifically talking about them and their forward deployed engineers who are going to be the enablers or the champions of that. And you're going to adopt methodologies and modes of thinking that break the paradigm, and you need a credible interaction there. It's like, and I do believe Palantir brings credibility there. Although I think in my next slide and what we're talking about, I think there's a way in which they can improve on that credibility and not have to do so much work to prove that they are that company.
People, including most experts, do not believe exist. And so like we have this problem in our interaction with people that is very different than other companies, I think. The problem that other companies have, broadly speaking, is they have to convince people that they'll be able to build products that are relevant tomorrow. Which, by the way, is much harder than people seem to think, especially analysts have this weird idea that building software is like writing an analyst report, or lawyers think building software product is like handing in a brief. You can just hire one law firm to do it. If the other law firm, it's just factually completely not true. But the problem, so the normal company has is trying to convince people that they will build things that they're not going to build tomorrow because it's not actually in their DNA. The problem Palantir has is convincing people that they need something that they will need tomorrow. And these are very, very different problems. We're very focused as a company on this, delivering things we believe you will need tomorrow, building on our internal view of what we're good at and what we've shown we're good at, whether it was, I went through the whole history or at least part of it, while then often figuring out ways to modulate the product so that people who want parts of the product that maybe are a little bit more refurbishing your 90s enterprise-like can also have refurbishment.
Right. So the way you solve this problem, the way most companies have solved this problem, is create a strong developer community who are your advocates, right? Because the people who are forward thinking at these organizations are not the decision makers. Often they're the developers. And I don't mean IT decision makers. I'm not talking about the CTO. I'm not talking about a VP. I'm talking about actual software engineers who day to day work with these tools. And the way Palantir is going to have to approach this problem is they're going to have to get online onboarding freely available and open to anyone to try the system, online documentation, getting started guides, sample code on GitHub, and you're going to need to go around city to city to host conferences, train and certify developers at those conferences. And they will do that on their own time. Every developer gets a budget every year to go out and learn new things and get certified and do all this cool stuff. And the companies generally let them do whatever it is they want to do. That's how I, got into Databricks, right? So like, I think it's really important that we, or that Palantir create this developer advocate, because all of those other discussions he's talking about that are hard, like to convince people they need to be the company of tomorrow, not today, or like, these are the challenges that you'll face, become much easier when the culture is already inculcated within their software engineers who are then bubbling that up to the decision makers as well. It's a top-down, bottom-up approach. If Palantir does not create a developer community soon, I'm going to have to bullpen on this stock. And when I may say by soon, I'm thinking like 2024-ish, because, it takes time to ramp that up. And also the problem is that they'll never get to that 100,000 customer mark that I'm looking for in that order of magnitude range if they can't do this. This is the enabling way in which you do it. And so, yeah, I think that they're overlooking this, but Maybe not. Maybe they've got something in the works. I know they did release some, interesting certification program recently, but it's only available to existing customers. But maybe that's the beta test. Maybe that's the way they're going to iron this out and release it to everyone. But this is super important to be the enabler they're looking for on the sales side to do top down, bottom up convergence that they're going to need to do. That's my thoughts on the interview. Hope you got something out of it. Just a heads up, I'm going to be on JG's channel, Mr. Moon Money, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific. We're going to be talking all things Palantir. I don't know if we're doing a live broadcast. Maybe he's not doing a live broadcast, but check out his channel, Mr. Moon Money, and look for that interview. It's our third interview together. JG and I always have really good talks. He's a super cool guy, and I always appreciate those conversations. So check me out on that channel, guys. Talk to you.